and welcome to the WIHS Journal, Public Affairs from 104.9. I'm Paul Kretschmer. Today's topic is hospital cost transparency.
Yes, hi, I am Cynthia Fisher, and I represent PatientRightsAdvocate.org, and I am founder and chairman of the organization.
Okay. What got you interested in this particular field then? Was it part of your past experience?
Yes, Paul, I actually have been a CEO in the medical and healthcare space. I'm a life sciences entrepreneur, and I had started a company called Viacord back in 1992, and we were transparent in the quality of the umbilical cord blood stem cell collections that we did, as well as the outcomes when these stem cells from cord blood were used as an alternative to bone marrow for any type of bone marrow transplant, treating leukemias or genetic disorders. We actually published on all of the outcomes that we had as well. And then we were transparent on prices, that we charged one price, one patient, all patients, whether their insurance covered or not. All around the globe, we were able to charge the same price. And that company still exists today. I just don't run it anymore. I've sold my interest. But I came to Washington to bring the voice of the American consumers through PatientRightsAdvocate.org. And the consumers aren't just all of us as patients, but anybody who purchases health care, and that's employers and unions and the American workers, and anybody who buys health insurance coverage or pays for care. All of us are actually consumers of health care, and we didn't have a voice at the table when it came to policy and law. And what we did is we found that there are existing laws that give us all the rights to know prices from hospitals and insurance companies before we get our health care, in advance of care, and that we can actually be able to see all the varied prices wherever we go to get care and be able to shop and choose. And this is revolutionary, and it exists in existing law, and we're thrilled that as of last year, all of hospitals are to post all of their prices online so we can get them up front.
It's one thing to have a law that requires that. It's sometimes another matter to actually see a company fulfill what the law says without hemming and hawing about it. What has been your experience in that regard?
Well, isn't that the truth, Paul? I mean, what we found in our first semi-annual report in July of last year, since the rule went into effect and the law was in place for hospitals in January 1, 2021, to start showing their prices. And last year we found that only 5.6% of the hospitals were in compliance back in July, 6 months in. Well, now we're over a year into the law, and we just published our second semi-annual report. And though it's improved, which is a good thing, it's improved, but we found that only 14.3% of over 1,000 hospitals in this country are in compliance. Well, that's abysmal. That means the hospitals are really flouting and still obstructing any of us from being able to easily go online and shop and compare their prices based on our plans, but also based on the discounted cash prices. So they're still obstructing on the law when they're not completing all of their data fields showing all of the prices across every payer and every plan. And that's where we found the deficiencies. And so we're looking for this administration, the Biden administration, who President Biden has leaned into the anti-competitive behavior of the hospitals, saying that he increased the fines to $2 million per year per hospital. But we need to see robust enforcement to get these hospitals to comply and be transparent about that as well.
Does it have to be painful enough for the hospitals to actually comply, or are they more likely than not to simply write it off as a cost of doing business?
Well, we've had hospital CEOs say, go ahead, fine us. It's a small fine in comparison to what monies they can make on a daily basis by keeping patients in the dark. And remember, Paul, a year before, the hospitals and a hospital association sued the Department of Justice to keep patients in the dark. And guess what? We won in the courts. We all won the right to see these prices by law, both in the lower court and in the appellate courts, hands down unanimously in favor of patients being well informed in advance of care of their choices and competition in pricing, rather than being ill-informed or non-informed by the hospitals. But those hospitals not in compliance are choosing still to flout the law, wait until they're fined, and keep us all in the dark, because the money's just too good when they can continue to overcharge patients and keep them away from knowing what is, in fact, a fair market price for things as simple as an MRI, a colonoscopy, or even childbirth. And Paul, what we're finding is the Wall Street Journal reported that once the curtain was pulled back and they started to compare hospital prices in the sunlight, they were seeing that in one hospital on the same day, one woman's plan and her coverage, as well as her out-of-pocket, was responsible for paying for a C-section by the same team, same day, a little over $6,000. And another woman was charged over $60,000 by the same codes on the same day. That's a 10 times difference for giving birth to a child in the same hospital. I mean, what employer would tolerate paying 10 times more for a supply in their supply chain than their competitors? I don't think any employer would tolerate that. I certainly wouldn't tolerate paying 10 times more for a gallon of milk than the person in front of me in line. And yet this happens every day in healthcare from the hospital overcharges.
Have you found that what the figures show, as you just illustrated, are both illegal under federal law as well as leaving people feeling like they've been scalped?
Yes, unfortunately, people understand that highway robbery is being committed every day. And in fact, we just saw a survey that showed us that 58% of the people surveyed went to the hospital for care last year. And over 60% of them believed very strongly that they were overcharged beyond their insurance plan. But now that we have access to this data, we're seeing overcharges are rampant. And oftentimes, people are being upcoded and upcharged by these hospitals, and the insurance that is really their paycheck money, it's coming out of their wages paying for these premiums, is actually just paying those bills at high prices that sometimes are even beyond the negotiated insured rate. And that's highway robbery. And we know it stops. We know, in fact, a young man who was charged $15,000 for an EpiPen they handed him when he had a nut allergy and went to the hospital emergency room. Now, his emergency bill was $3,000 for the epinephrine, which really cost the hospital about $1.50 because it's generic, and saline and Benadryl. But when he actually got his bill months later, they handed him an EpiPen on the way out, and he was charged $15,000 for that EpiPen, and he had a $5,000 high deductible plan. And wouldn't you know, his insurance said, well, you're responsible for $4,900 for that EpiPen because you have a $5,000 high deductible. And when he looked online and he found the actual negotiated rate was $600, still way high, because he could have gone across the street for $130 and gotten 2 EpiPens at a pharmacy. But the fact of the matter was the negotiated rate was thousands of dollars higher than the $600 that was posted on the negotiated rate. So the hospital, when he wrote a letter to the CEO and the CFO and said, you overcharged me, as did my insurer, they wiped out the charges completely, saying, I'm sorry, there was an error.
It seems apropos that when it comes to describing care on a form or a report, that the word code is used, because when I think of code, I think of something like a secret code where you're actually sending a message, but you don't intend the wrong person or the person you don't want to see it to be able to comprehend it.
Well said. And by the rule of the law, they are to show all prices by every code and by every clearly named code so that you and I could understand what that code means. So if it's for an MRI without contrast, for instance, you don't have to drink something to have contrast. It's just a standard MRI. We would be able to understand that without having to interpret the code. And so a lot of these hospitals aren't even naming the code, nor are they naming by law the required complete name of the insurance plan or the employer health plan that they accept at the hospital. So this is just common sense. The only way we can shop is when we can compare across all negotiated rates, just like we do when we shop for airlines, right? We might know there are different prices for flights with JetBlue or United, even within the same airlines. They'll have different prices for the 9 flights a day they might have to Orlando from wherever we are. But we get to choose which ones we know in advance that we can afford. And having the understanding of what fair market prices are, like when we shop for airlines, even though there's large variation, fuel costs, wind, passenger load, those airlines are able to price. And there's no reason why a colonoscopy can't be completely and fully priced in advance of care, that we have no surprises. And right now, without knowing these prices in advance, clearly stated, every bill's a surprise, right? Every bill's a surprise. And we know the beauty in getting these prices up front is it moves us toward, like we have with airlines, it moves us all to getting broad access to care with financial certainty and moving to give what 92% of Americans want, and that is to have an upfront, clear, and binding price before we get care.
There are for-profit hospitals, there are nonprofit hospitals. There are chain hospitals like Prospect Systems of California, and then there are nonprofit organizations like Yale New Haven Health System here in Connecticut. Does it seem to make much difference between all of those variations of hospital management in terms of how they handle their prices and how much they disclose or don't disclose?
Well, Paul, as we looked at our report of February, looking across 1,000 hospitals, I think what we found, which was most egregious, was the largest hospital systems. And let me give you an example of the 3 most largest, one being a for-profit hospital called the Hospital Corporation of America, one of the largest for-profit hospital systems. We looked at 188 of their hospitals. 0 of them were in compliance. Now, the next 2 largest systems we had were Ascension and Community hospital systems. And what we found, they didn't comply either. They had 1 or 2 hospitals out of their nonprofit systems. And when we looked at the most egregiousness of noncompliance, it was these largest hospital systems that were really still obfuscating and not fully representing all of the prices by every payer and every plan. So they were at like 0.05% compliance compared to the 14.3%. And in fact, we applaud a lot of the smaller rural hospitals across the country were the ones that were actually providing the best compliance and had the best files. And we think it's because that's how they compete, because they can provide better quality of care at a better price, and so they weren't afraid to show their prices because this is going to give them an advantage for things like childbirth or orthopedic surgeries or urgent care, for instance. So we applaud those hospitals that stepped up and are in compliance with the rule. And sadly, Paul, if I look at Connecticut, which, I do know you're out of Middletown, Connecticut, and we had of the 9 hospitals that we looked at in Connecticut, we had 0 compliance. And that included Yale New Haven Hospital, major nonprofit hospital system, Bristol Hospital, Bridgeport Hospital, not compliant. And this is really harming patients because patients want financial certainty. And 64% of Americans surveyed are sitting on the sidelines, not getting the care they know they need. They're delaying care for fear of financial ruin because they don't know if they can afford the care they're seeking.
Thank you very much, Cynthia Fisher.
Yes, please go to our website. We update it regularly and how you can participate and how you can save on your medical bills and how you can prevent overcharges. And go to patientrightsadvocate.org. That's patientrightsadvocate.org, and we'll help you save.
Thank you very much for your time today, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Call us at 860-346-1049. Opinions expressed are those of the participants, not necessarily those of the staff or management of the station. The WIHS Journal is public affairs from 104.9 WIHS.